From his stronghold in the wild Sierra Maestre Mountains, Cuba's Fidel Castro emerged triumphant after 2 years of guerrilla warfare against the Batista regime. The revolution that began with Castro a fugitive, practically alone, landing with 82 followers, to be nearly wiped out by government forces, ended with the flight of dictator Fulgencio Batista and the entry into Havana of rebel forces to be acclaimed by the city. The forces of Castro's 26th of July movement, named for the anniversary of his first attack on the regime in 1953, have grown vastly, their power enlarged by captured and surrendered army weapons. Nearly 2 years of hit-and-run warfare aimed at toppling Batista's government by paralyzing Cuba's economy culminated in victory as 1958 ended. Fidel Castro, in many ways an unknown quantity in his politics and policies, but certain to be dominant in Cuba's new era, just begun.
In January 1959, the radios in Havana were announcing that their president, Batista, had left Cuba. The most exciting thing for me, having photographed all of this, was photographing the troops coming into Havana. I was also an executive photographer for about 45 years. I enjoyed the human contact with big known names. My name is Lester Cole, and I am 95 years old. I was born in 1911, born and raised in the Bronx. When I first went into the Brooklyn Navy Yard as a junior engineering draftsman, I was 18 years old, and I was going to Cooper Union at night studying architecture. I did get a job with a studio as an assistant to a photographer who did commercial photography. I quit the photography business and decided that I wanted to be a radio announcer. So I blew it somewhere and they fired me. When World War II started, that was when I decided to go back to the Navy Department. I was hired because what they were looking for at that time was an individual who had had some experience with ship protections from moored mines. So they established a Paravane section and put me in charge. Probably about 1947, 48, and that's when I decided to become a photographer. The Gene Rayburn studio was owned by Jason Koumanos, who specialized in brides and babies. He said, I need someone that can make appointments and so forth. He said, you sound like you have a good phone voice, and little by little we became friends, he and I. I said, tell me about the lighting that you use. That was the secret of the whole Gene Rayburn studio. So I decided to devote my lighting, if I could get good, to his theory of one side only. I bought the studio and kept the name of Gene Rayburn Studio. I made it my business to find out what offices were near 46th Street and 5th Avenue, at 600 5th Avenue, 590 5th Avenue, Empire State Building, Radio City, and I looked up the different corporations' phone numbers and asked for the Public Relations Department, and struck gold. I said, all you have to do is just send an executive over, and without obligation, I will do an executive sitting on them. And if you think I qualify for your assignments, we're your photographers. And that worked. And that gave me ideas of soliciting trade associations and trade magazines, and they all had their own photographers, but not specialists in portraitures. I introduced Polaroid portraiture. I revolutionized the business of getting out to the PR departments of corporations almost immediate prints. They did not have to wait days to get proofs and then to wait for the finished picture. Goodyear, Goodrich from Ohio came to us. A couple of companies from Los Angeles who were sending executives to us. Ohio, after reading about immediate portraiture. It was September 1958. I was hired by a magazine called Diplomat to do photographs of important people in Havana. It seems that the magazine would select a country once a month or every few months and devote different stories and photographs of people in that country. We had accommodations at the Havana Hilton in return for the magazine using the byline photographed at the Havana Hilton Hotel. The Batista family sitting done at his estate called Cucini was very interesting. I had an affinity for this very nice man. I mean, how could I say I disliked him? He was a bad dictator, he killed people. Well, he was not that to me. He says, if it should be that you need some help, that you have a problem, I would like you to call me in the palace. He says, snaps his finger, someone, mi tarjeta por favor, señor, my card. So his card comes over, President of the Republic of Cuba, and he takes a pen and he writes a telephone number. He says, this is one of the 4 phones on my desk. It's the only white phone. All others are red phones. Nobody is permitted to pick this phone up but me. He says, so you call this number, and if I'm not there, call again if you need to speak to me. What could be nicer than the president of a country telling you you need help? I'll help you. About a month after I photographed Batista, Fidel won his revolution, which was January 1, 1959. I saw this gentleman with a gold braid on his shoulder, and I went over and introduced myself that I was photographer for magazine Diplomat of Washington. I was here doing pictures. I understand you're the aide to Dr. Castro. He says, yes, I am. He spoke English. He said, I shall use whatever influence I have with Dr. Castro to arrange an appointment for you to photograph him. A few days later, this is after Fidel came in, I'm informed by him that Fidel has consented to pose for a picture. I never had a more cooperative subject in all the years that I photographed individuals. He was exceptionally courteous and helpful. The only thing was we could not converse. My poor Spanish and his poor English didn't make it. Then the doctor of the hotel and the manager of the hotel, they want a picture taken with Dr. Castro, so I took another picture, another picture. After I got finished with the head and shoulder shots on Raul Castro, I was winding up with the 3/4 standing pose. I started to move him slightly to the left, at which time, resentfully, he put his hand on his gun belt in a threatening gesture, like he was about to shoot me. I said, you cannot shoot me, I'm an American. William Morgan, in my estimation, was one of the most intriguing characters in the Castro forces. He was an American soldier and was discharged from the American service, I believe, for having belted his captain or something like that. I said to him, William, how come you became part of the Cuban Revolution? And he said to me that the neighbors in the house next door to the building he lived in Ohio, their son had gone to Cuba on a holiday and never returned from Cuba. And he was listed as dead. And the family would appreciate it if I went to Cuba to try to find out what happened to their son. As time went on, Morgan became more and more in disfavor with the Cuban Revolution. He was accused of being a counter-revolutionary and finally was executed in Havana. I photographed many of their commandantes. These were all commandantes in charge of different divisions in the new Revolutionary Party. One of the commandantes had no beard and was in American clothes. So I asked my interpreter to find out how come. And he went over to the gentleman and found out his name was Faustino Perez, and he was the minister of misappropriated funds and stolen property. But he felt he would look better in American clothes and without the beard. However, that was not what the Castros thought was being a pure revolutionary, because their motto was, "No beard shall be shaved until the revolution is won." Mr. Faustino Perez wound up with a 2 or 3 week prison sentence. This photograph is of Rafael San Martin, who was the only other Argentine besides Che Guevara in Havana in the forces. He was my guide, my chauffeur, and my interpreter on the photo safaris that I went on. One day I was I was leaving the coffee shop at the Havana Hilton Hotel, and as I was walking out, a small entourage of Fidel and a few of his bodyguards was coming into the coffee shop. And he saw me, and he stopped for a moment, and he waved his hand at me and said, "You learned Spanish." Che Guevara, he never sat for me. He had one excuse after the other to my assistant, saying, "My asthma is very bad, my asthma. I do not feel so good." He always excused himself, but he never did sit for me. Now these are the barbudos. The barbudos are the bearded ones who comprise the various armies of the Castro Revolution. They saw me with the camera, they'd stand in front of me and say, what would you like me to do? And naturally I'd pose them, sitting them down with the machine guns or with their rifles and things like that. This is an interesting group, to me at least interesting, in that it shows the 3 different ages of individuals in the Castro forces. One day I returned to the apartment in late afternoon, and I was welcomed by my dear wife, who said she'd seen a very shocking thing happen that day. That across the street from the apartment, the building that we lived, was a huge vacant lot with a wall there, and that several men were lined up against the wall and shot, executed by Castro soldiers. I said, "I can't believe that happened," but she said, "You can rest assured it did. I saw it." It got to be around February 1960, and I started to feel uneasy about staying anymore. Every now and then, an investigation team of soldiers would knock on my door. I lived there from September 58 to February 1960, that's right. It was the most exciting thing that I could ever have encountered. I had no idea that I was going to be there that long. Fortunately, my studio in New York was self-running. I never went back to Cuba, and I would never have any intentions of going back there again. The memories that were so pleasant, I know I could never have again. And I belong here in the United States. Okay, stay there. Drop the chin. Chin down a little. Everything is so small. I'm used to a big head and shoulder. That's a good one.